Hi all, my name is Shamima and I'm from the University of Western Australia. Thank you for attending the paper presentation by Joe Calder and Matt Knox from the University of Tasmania. The topic to be presented is examining changes to student leadership, well-being and engagement for the duration of a course, a quantitative study. Please note that this is a recorded session. This will be a 20-minute presentation with a 10 minutes of question and answer at the end of the session. You may raise your hands to ask a question or put your questions in the question tab. You can also like someone else's question and that would put the question to the top of the list. Lastly, I would appreciate if you could mute the mics while the speaker presents. Calder and Matt, anytime, please start. Go for it.
Thank you, Shamima. Okay, so if everyone can see that, I'll begin. Thank you everyone for joining us today. As Shamima said, this presentation is on examining changes to student leadership, wellbeing and engagement for the duration of a course, the quantitative study. Quick overview of the presentation. Going to begin with some context, then get into our background literature, discuss our method, as well as our findings, and then end with a question for the room. I'm representing my team on the screen here today. I'm actually a bit of a baby of the team. This is my first kind of presentation like this, so please be kind in your questioning. So the context of our study and where it's situated in, let's not worry about updates, is at University College, which is the 5th college of the University of Tasmania. They typically tend to apply a practice-based pedagogy using the professional attributes framework, and that's developed through pre-degrees and associate degrees. And along with that, practitioner manuals are used to carefully curate a digital library that is embedded in the curriculum. Now, this is all applied to a relatively non-traditional cohort. And if you would compare that to a traditional cohort where you've got bachelor level entry from typical secondary education or pre-tertiary, this cohort comes from all walks of life. So the theoretical framework that we adopt is a combination of the two on the screen. So we use the lens of a transitional pedagogy, which is Sally Kiff's work, and it tends to aid students in becoming a university student. And a couple of examples of this in context really is Bates' work in Australia, looking at first year low tertiary admission scores, and as well as it being applied in areas of associate degrees, which is exactly where our research is situated and is the concentration of UC cohort as well. Now, we blended this with the broaden and build theory of positive psychology, which tends to posit that fostering positive emotions has reciprocal effects, which leads to what's called positive spiraling to foster emotional well-being and what's known in positive psychology as flourishing. This has been applied in previous higher education contexts as well as in teams and organisations. So the question really here that we asked is, can broaden and build be applied to curriculum? So can positive emotions and positive spiraling promote efficacy and other positive behaviours that supports this student transitioning that's adopted in the transition pedagogy? The literature that we use here is, again, a blend. So we've adopted authentic leadership theory, which is a concentration on awareness, sincerity, and consideration of ethics and formal influences that are critical behaviours in development. Wellbeing is, of course, a very recognised challenge right now, given our pandemic, and a lot of research at the moment is concentrated on leadership supporting strong senses of wellbeing. As well as this, we've got classroom belonging as well as engagement in class. Belonging is, of course, a really essential component of human functioning and is measured consistently in all Australian student experience surveys, as well as surveys conducted in similar topics in other countries. And engagement of class is typically used as a predictor of strong student success levels and longer term outcomes. So in looking at this literature, the gap that we identified that we seek to fill is that there are specific programs that tend to develop leadership, But the question we wanted to ask was, can we develop these implicitly through teaching discipline content practically, rather than explicitly giving leadership development courses? And as well as that, to what extent can we support belonging and engagement in well-designed curriculum as well? And can this be applied in a transition pedagogy subject? So the survey method was a quantitative pen and paper survey design, and we delivered this in both weeks 4 and weeks 11 of the 2019 term. This was due to be replicated, but of course it wasn't due to COVID-19. We conducted some content analysis of our units and subjects, looking at the ILOs and the assessments and coding them based on their instruction approaches, and the synthesis at the end as well. I will definitely get to in the third slide. So we used a series of validated instruments, all with strong composite reliability scores. We also adapted a work engagement style to the classroom. We used the pen and paper approach to allow for time in class for students to fulfill their survey, and this was really to eliminate sample bias of particularly high performing students that would take a survey out of class and actually do it, rather than those that mightn't. So the data we harvested was through using unit outlines, and we recoded this data with the solo taxonomy levels. Assessments were coded by their type, and the instruction types were all grouped into a primary pedagogy. Where we had conflict in our analysis was from conflicting levels of ILOs or assessments. So we assessed the most common used, and we adopted this in our synthesis. So we coded and conducted analysis to try and understand how these behaviours all kind of work together. And what we found when we started our explorations was, actually, I've jumped far too ahead. We need to talk about our objective first. So the objective of this was actually to understand what kind of pedagogy or pedagogy elements could affect leadership, as well as high and low levels of belonging and engagement in our students. And what we found when we started our explorations was that authentic leadership behaviours do have a positive effect on a sense of belonging, wellbeing and engagement. This was conducted in our pilot analysis. So we looked at this during the first set of the data that we drew from in week 4, and it confirmed these preliminary relationships quite strongly. So here we can see a very happy student who's flourishing through strong levels of authentic leadership. This is also a good representation of me when we looked at this data, because we did find that broaden and build theory tends to apply. So in this study, in the current study, while we're dealing with relatively low numbers, we actually found that where there's high levels of authentic leadership behaviours, there's also a demonstrated high level of engagement and belonging. So a student that presents strong leadership behaviours also seems to present strong levels of belonging and engagement as well. Likewise, students that demonstrated low levels of leadership demonstrated low levels of belonging and engagement. So building authentic leadership behaviours here creates positive outcomes, and we identified this using our analysis and our chi-square significant testing was significant, as you can see by the 0.001. We were quite happy with that. And when we examined the fee, we identified that it was a moderate effect size of 0.57. So explaining why this effect size was there was actually quite difficult, because when we looked at our curriculum, we couldn't really pinpoint a significant relationship between ILOs, assessments, and the types of delivery that were being conducted. So that's pretty much the end of our research and the end of our presentation. No, of course not though. With further analysis into individual differences, We looked at the gender, how many years someone had studied, whether they were full-time or part-time, international or domestic, whether their employment status was different. Unfortunately, though, none of this really came up with any significant differences either. Interestingly enough, attendance mode and delivery did. In saying this, these different demographics could be significant with a higher sample size, but what we really wanted to concentrate on here is that attendance mode and entry type are already significant at this low level, and we find that really important for scaling. So that's exactly why we're going to talk about it a little bit more. And I might actually pass this one over to Jo.
Yes.
You
can keep the control of the PowerPoint.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so just to backtrack a bit, if we've been looking at the idea that there is a theory around transition pedagogy and how that enables and supports how curriculum and wraparound services for students can support them to transition into being effective learners in the higher education setting. We've also looked at the theory of broaden and build, which thinks about and talks about positive emotional spirals, where you have two things working together to create positive effects, in our case in students, so that and the idea is that will that then support students in their learning to be effective learners and to get the most out of their course. So when we look at and then we wanted to think in terms of curriculum, what elements of curriculum might support that, and we found that for our survey, a small sample size, we couldn't find any predictive effects of curriculum for, I've just lost the slide. Never mind. Matt, can you put it back? Never mind, I'll keep talking. But the two things that did have, two elements that did have a predictive relationship in terms of predicting leadership was attendance. And the counterintuitive from the perspective of like how we think in terms of our own teaching, or even indeed when we look at the literature, tend to assume and believe that on-campus face-to-face learning experiences create greater sense of belonging and engagement in students, and also perhaps would be better for students in developing their leadership capabilities. And so when we find that actually it was the online or the combined online and face-to-face where students outperformed on-campus learners in leadership, that poses a question for us. What might that mean? Likewise with entry points. So the University College is quite unique within the University of Tasmania in that it's the cohort is a mixture of primarily students who have recently graduated from Year 12 secondary school education, but typically didn't get the mark they needed to get into a bachelor degree, and so they're enrolled in University College as a kind of transition to upskill and build their capabilities through an associate degree. And likewise, and as well, there's another broad cohort of mature learners who are perhaps working in full-time jobs, already have very busy lives, and who have a different relationship with the university and with their course. So when we think about attendance, we would like to explore in the future research. Is it perhaps that the students who were distance are self-selecting as people who are quite motivated, they know what they want to do, they have those kind of self-leadership and authentic leadership capabilities, they come to study with those already intact and developed, and that they don't necessarily need to have a strong sense of belonging or engagement with the curriculum or the university course and people who are studying it or teaching it, because they are able to, they know what they want and they're doing it their way. Whereas if we look at the differences between entry, can see that perhaps the Year 12 graduates being a bit less driven, perhaps they're there because they don't know what else to do, then that also might indicate why that the recent Year 12 graduates not only have less well-developed leadership capability, which, being younger, less experienced, but also less belonging and engagement because they're perhaps not actually engaged in, really driven to be in this particular course. And so what we want to think about then is, having these thoughts, what does that mean for our curriculum, given that the study said did not have any predictive relationship of leadership and belonging and engagement related to elements of the curriculum. So the next slide, please, Matt. So what the next step is, we want to think about, is there a way to better utilise the benefit of positive spirals in curriculum to support transition? So we've established that for attendance mode and for entry, there is a predictive relationship of leadership, and in the case of entry, leadership and wellbeing and engagement. So what can we embed into curriculum that might further build that for our students, particularly our younger students who don't have the same advantages as a mature age student might, and how might we better think about what curriculum components will support them? And so one of the questions for that we'd like to discuss following this is to get your insights on what you think might be a good way forward. So obviously we've got a small data set. It's a pilot study. We need to expand the sample and have a greater ability to interrogate at the level of finer detail, but also thinking about what might be going on, why we got the results we did, and also just putting it out there if any of you are interested in connecting in with this research and perhaps talking with us about using the survey and thinking of, and seeing how it applies within your cohort of students and your particular curriculum. Thank you.
Okay.
But that was just in time.
Yeah, perfect.
Does anyone from
Stop sharing before that goes too bad.
Yeah, oh good. Does anybody have any questions? Well, actually, I do have a question for you. Is that as the data is collected from business students, would you consider replicating the study to other disciplines?
Absolutely. I think it's an important first step, to be honest. I think there's a lot of different pedagogies applied across disciplines, and more often than not, they're actually targeted at the discipline they're teaching. So it'd be really interesting to see what kind of insights we could draw from the different pedagogies where they're applied and compare that to the discipline that the students are learning as well, and seeing if that in and itself can make a difference. So perhaps social science students that are learning about self-awareness theory have a higher level of engagement with their course because it's also helping them, flourish in and of itself too. So it would have to be a consideration.
Thank you for that. Do you also think that your results would vary if you replicate them at a postgraduate level?
Absolutely, but I think Joe might be better to talk about that one. She's had a lot more experience with PhD students than I have.
Yeah. Well, I think the core elements that we're looking at are people's sense of the leadership, the sense of belonging and engagement, and another part of the study is wellbeing that we look at. And they are all, and then the curriculum and how that can be designed in a way that creates positive spirals of students feeling like they have, they've got the qualities of leadership that include self-efficacy and the ability to make decisions and act on them. And you've also got the sense that they belong, they want to be there, they're valued, all of those things. And that applies, I think, not just in education, but across any human activity that you engage in. It will have relevance. And so, but thinking particularly in terms of higher education and, having been a PhD student and a grad cert student and a grad dip cert student, definitely the sense of, anything in the experience of being a student that helps you connect into the course and feel like you really want to be there, connect with your fellow students, connect with your teachers. So I think, I don't see it as specific to University College, although there are some very interesting, unique aspects of University College that we are going to tease out.
Thank you. Joseph Crawford has commented that perhaps the students within postgraduate studies have greater efficacy, similar to those distance learners within the associate degrees. They may come with a lot of personal and professional experience and need the same support to transition. Thank you for that. I do have one more question, but just checking, what motivated you to research this area?
Joe, would you like to start?
Yeah. Well, I think University College is, it's new to University of Tasmania and it's very shiny and sparkly, and the staff, they have they have like dedicated curriculum designers as well as teaching team, and they all work together. And so it's in that sense, it's like the ideal context in which you would want to design curriculum, because it's very well resourced, very highly expert teachers, and so you have the ability, presumably, to test your students and see, the characteristics in terms of leadership, in terms of engagement, wellbeing, and then you have the expertise of the curriculum design team and the teaching team to take the insights that we provide and then feed it into the curriculum design. If you think about most higher education institutions, particularly post-COVID and all the job losses, there's not that kind of resourcing that makes it as straightforward to say, here's an insight, we can put it into the curriculum, see if it has an effect, and then either keep it or improve it or remove it if it didn't do any good.
Yeah, and to add to that as well, UC's approach is I mean, they name it up in all of their advertising, and it's student-centric. So the fact that their pedagogy and their curriculum is designed in a way to enable students to not only engage with their studies, but to have higher levels of wellbeing and have a greater sense of belonging within their wider community. So adopting a study like this, where we're attempting, or we're looking at, what strengths in students can we utilise to promote flourishing in other areas, UC is just the perfect candidate for that. And from a personal standpoint as well, I had quite personal traumatic experiences outside of my studies while they were occurring, and that taught me a lot of strength and resilience that was extremely useful in the external world. But when I came back into university, I didn't feel engaged. I didn't feel like I belonged there because I had all this other stuff going on. But if I was to go into a pedagogy that was structured in a way to enable those learnings that I've had in life to apply them to my studies, I'd imagine I probably would have done a lot better. In saying that, I am here, so that's really good too.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Does anyone else have any questions? We've got Demelza having a comment. So, hi Joe and Matt, great presentation. I'm with the UW Student Achievement Working Party, and we have a transition focus in one stream. I'd be happy to connect you to that stream lead. I think the attendance data is really interesting and worth lots of thoughts. That's fantastic. Thank you, Demelza.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Demelza, you've got my email, so you can just contact me if you like, and I'll pass it on to the team
All right. If there's nothing else, then thank you again for presenting and to all for attending. There is a private messaging function on Canopy. Please use that to get in touch with the speakers. And we welcome everyone to continue in our subsequent sessions. Have a great day all.